In this lesson, we're going to set up our enemy character. Alright, so let's go ahead and go to our projects browser here, and let's go to enemies folder, and we have our enemy, and we're going to left click and drag that into the scene. You may want to go ahead and select the object in your browser just to do a quick check of your options here. Under the model, make sure import materials is turned off and then hit apply, and then also make sure your rig is set to none. This does not have any skeletal animations, so there's no reason to have it. So now that we have that all set, let's go ahead and apply our material. I've gone ahead and created this material already. You'll notice that this material has the emission map tied to that, and that's going to give us the glowing red eye that's on the front of that, as you can see there. And so now that we have that all set up, let's go ahead and add a couple of components. First component we're going to add is our rigid body component. Actually, I went to effects. I meant to go to physics, and we'll add rigid body. Let's constrain the position in the Y, and then also constrain the X and Z on the rotation. So now with that, let's add one more component, and we're going to add in a capsule collider. You'll see the capsule collider does a pretty good job of guessing, but it's using the antenna as well. I don't need a collision on that, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the capsule collider, and I'm going to adjust the height to 2, and then I'm going to set the Y value to 1, and that should fit the enemy pretty well. Now with this collider, this is the collider itself, but I want to be able to catch the player, and so I need another collider that is going to basically be the radius around the enemy in which it can damage the player. And so I'm going to add another component, and it's going to be another collider, but this time we're going to use a sphere collider. So the sphere collider does a pretty good job. It's set to a radius of 0.5. It's got a height of, or excuse me, not 0.5. I was looking at that. I was like, that's kind of weird. 1.38. Okay, and so this is pretty good. I think that's a pretty fair radius. So if the player gets in with that, it will say that it's caught the player. If you want to reduce that, you're more than welcome to. Maybe you want to go to around 1. So that's totally fine as well. I think that'll work a little bit better. Let's actually adjust the center of that. Let's set that to 1, so that way it's centered up on the object itself. All right. So now with that sphere collider, there's one more important step. Make sure you're paying attention. We need to make sure that we have is trigger turned on. If we don't have is trigger turned on, it will collide with everything out to the spherical radius here. It won't allow the player to actually go in that, and it won't actually detect the player. So we want to use this as a trigger. So anything that has a collider on it can pass through a trigger. And we use triggers to tell it, hey, something is happening. Okay? And so what we want to do is whenever the enemy rolls over the player, we want it to say, hey, I've caught the player, and then it sends out a message and it reduces the player's health or starts the game over. Okay? So now that we have that all set up, I think that's everything that we need besides the script for the enemy. Now on the enemy script, I already have these brought into the project here. So let's go ahead and just take the enemy movement and let's place that on our enemy object. So let's left click and drag that onto the enemy object, and you'll see that that script has been applied. Now let's go ahead and also create a prefab of our enemy, so that way we can create multiples at the same time without having to deal with recreating the materials and all of that. So let's left click and drag that into our prefabs folder, and it has been created for us. I also did that with the player, just in case you want to just drag the player in at any other time. Okay, so we have our enemy set, we've got our player set, and we have this script. So what happens if we hit play? Nothing. Okay, the enemy doesn't know what to do. It's saying, hey, there's an object reference that's not set up here. Let's double click on that and let's see what the issue is. If we take a look at MonoDevelop, it's saying, oh, I can't find this mothership object. Okay, That's part of the script itself. It's going to detect whether the energy has been collected, and if it has been collected, it's going to stop the enemy from moving. So we don't even have a mothership in our scene, and so let's go ahead and put that in while we're here. So this is technically, I guess, an enemy, and I'm going to bring in let's bring in the enemy mesh again, but I'm going to make this one much larger. And so I'm going to set this to maybe a scale of 5 on the X, Y, and Z. Okay, so we'll make that quite a bit larger. And let's go ahead and rotate it around to where the player would be able to see that. And I'm rotating the desert. I don't want to do that. I want the enemy. Okay, so I'm going to rotate that around to where I can see the eye, okay, from the camera's perspective. And let's go ahead and rename this to Mothership. Now, I know it's not a ship or anything like that. I just want to kind of make that pretty distinct there. So then we have the name Mothership. Everything's good there. Pretty happy with that. We could set up a collider with this if we wanted to. Actually, we do need to. I need to set up a physics collider. We'll do capsule collider, and you can see that it's going over the top there. Let's go ahead and set the height to 2. Now it's going to use the same values that we have just used on our last one, but you'll be asking, okay, why is it using the same values if we scaled that up? Well, anytime that you change the scale up here, it's going to be multiplied by whatever's down here. So the numbers are going to stay consistent in your components. Okay, so just be aware of that. All right, so now that we have that, let's create the collider that we need, or the trigger that we need for the player to actually enter into to make sure that it has been collected. So we could do another physics, we could do another sphere collider if we want, or a box collider. It's totally up to you. I think the sphere collider will work just fine. But this one, I actually want to take the Y value. Oops. Let's do this sphere collider. Let's take the Y value down, and let's try, I think 0 is what I want. Yep. So I want it to sit right at the base like this. And then I'm going to take my radius down, and I'm going to set it to a radius of about 0.8. So whenever actually let's do 1, just make it nice and even. Whenever the player gets close to the mothership, he'll go ahead and just deposit that in there. And there we go. So now that that is set up, let's go ahead and just add our material to that as well. And then we can take the mothership and make a prefab out of it. Now really quickly, before we forget, let's select this, make that sphere collider a trigger. Okay, awesome. So now we'll left click and drag that into our prefabs folder. So mothership, drop that in there. It's going to look very similar to the enemy, but don't worry about that. Okay, it'll be just fine. All right, so now we have that. Let's go ahead and apply our script. So add component, script, mothership. And while we're here, let's go ahead and actually apply that, so that way it's applied to the prefab as well. So we have our script applied, and you can see that we have the collected energy and we have the needed energy. And so the collected energy is basically what the player has collected, has deposited into the mothership, and then the needed energy is going to be the goal. And so the game designer can make this go up or down based on difficulty or something like that. And I'm just going to leave it at a nice solid number of 10 just to get us started. So now that we have the enemy and the mothership all set up, let's go ahead and move on into our next lesson.